I was really shocked that the Hong Kong authorities picked me to be a target because I was just telling the truth. As I mentioned, I don't think I've committed a crime. So I was really scared.
On British thought leaders, Cheung says a $1 million bounty on her head has changed her life.
I received a lot of messages from my friends and family, saying that, oh, sorry, Chloe, I can't, get in touch with you anymore because, you are now a fugitive of Hong Kong and we don't want to put ourselves at risk.
Chloe talks about the damage caused by Britain not enforcing the Hong Kong agreement.
Basically, what happened is that the Hong Kong authorities and the Chinese authorities has, trashed the Sino-British Joint Declaration. And what more disheartening is that the UK government knew that they trashed the treaty, but they did not do anything to hold them accountable.
She says Westminster is too naive in dealing with the Chinese regime and too reliant on Chinese investment.
They first dragged a Hong Konger into the Chinese consulate, and then, they placed bounty on activists like myself. And then, they imprisoned British citizen Jimmy Lai. They also, asked for the biggest embassy in central London, right next to the Tower Bridge. I think they are testing the red line and see at what point would the UK government say no to them. And so far, the UK government has not said no to them.
Welcome to British Thought Leaders. I'm Lee Hall. Today I'm sitting down with Chloe Cheung from the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation. Chloe, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you are 20 years old. You have a $1 million bounty on your head. Can you tell us what that means? And can you talk us through the story of how it happened?
Basically, last year, in 2024 December, the Hong Kong authorities decided to place a $1 million Hong Kong dollar bounty on my head with an arrest warrant, accusing me of violating the Hong Kong national security law. And they charged me with colluding with foreign forces and inciting secession. Basically, if anyone kidnapped me to the embassy or provide any information about me, they could get some sort of money as a reward. And basically, since then, the bounty actually changed my life because I have become a target of transnational repression. And earlier this year, there were two suspicious Chinese-looking men. They followed me from an event venue to a restaurant.
All right.
And they didn't order any food at the restaurant. They just, kept walking around me and tried to listen to my conversation with my friend. And when I had eye contact with them, when I tried to figure out where they are from, they just ran into a hotel and disappeared in the UK, in central London. And, I don't know whether they are Chinese proxies. I don't know whether they are Chinese spies or whether they are crazy random strangers or Chinese patriots that recognize my face. I don't know who they are, but I was pretty sure that they are trying to intimidate me or threaten me.
So this national security law is a law that they've come up with that they say applies all over the world, right, rather than just in Hong Kong.
Yeah, according to the national security law, it could apply extraterritorial. So if you are, a British violating the Hong Kong national security law in the UK, you could still be charged. If you say anything against the Hong Kong government in the UK, you could still be charged because there are also another rule about you don't necessarily have to hold a Hong Kong ID in order to be charged under the national security law. So you can be a French national or British national who who speak against the Hong Kong authorities and not in Hong Kong, you could still be charged under the national security law.
So how did you feel when you first found out about this bounty?
Well, I had been through a roller coaster of emotions. I was really frightened, scared and shocked when I first found out about the bounty because I was only 19 years old by then, and I have been doing what I believed, and I don't think I have committed a single crime. When I left Hong Kong, I wasn't at risk, and what I've been doing was, speaking to politicians, speaking to journalists about what is happening in Hong Kong. I tried to counter the Chinese Communist Party's narrative here in the UK. I told, journalists and politicians that, Hong Kong no longer had rule of law. We no longer had freedom of speech, freedom of the press in Hong Kong. There were 1,900 political prisoners in Hong Kong since 2019, and journalists like Jimmy Lai has been in prison for thousands of days, and these people are innocent people that should never be in prison, and that's what I have been telling the story of. And I was really shocked that the Hong Kong authorities picked me to be a target because I was just telling the truth. As I mentioned, I don't think I've committed a crime. So I was really scared at that point because I don't really know what a bounty mean. I've never imagined I would have an arrest warrant on my head, and that was actually a death penalty for me, and to say that I could never go back to Hong Kong. Because before the bounty, I still thought that I could be able to go back to Hong Kong. But after the bounty, I realized that I could never go back to Hong Kong, the home place that I born and grew up in. And however, at the same time, I felt like it was an honor to have an arrest warrant and a bounty, because it kind of proves that I was doing the right thing, and therefore the Hong Kong authorities decided to target me because they were afraid of truth. So it was both, an honor, and I was scared, and I have a lot of concerns. A lot of things came to me, straight after, including, I received a lot of messages from my friends and family, saying that, oh, sorry, Chloe, I can't, get in touch with you anymore because, you are now a fugitive of Hong Kong, and we don't want to put ourselves at risk. So some of my friends actually, stopped contacting me, and some of my family back in Hong Kong decided to not, keep in touch with me, and they also blame me on, why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you speaking against the government? Just live your life in the UK, right? So people don't really understand sometimes.
It's changed your life then, how you live. You must be much more aware of your safety, really.
Yeah, I do. I now, change my routine every day. I won't appear at the same place at the same time anymore because I need to avoid having a pattern, and that could make me safer. I need to always look over my shoulder to see if anyone's following me. I need to look at the mirror to see if there's any reflection that anyone is following me. I have to bring protective devices with me in order to avoid being kidnapped. When I, met new people, I became really suspicious on, whether they are spy, whether they want to get my information, or whether they genuinely want to be friends with me. So I became a lot more suspicious on people, which is, quite depressing, because I don't want to live my life like that. I still wanted to explore a lot of things. I still wanted to meet a lot of new people, but it is what it is. I am still trying my best to get used to that, and I am trying my best to counter that emotional state as well, because that was what the Chinese Communist Party want me to get through. They intentionally put a bounty on activists' head because they want them to be isolated. They want Hong Kongers to be frightened about the bounty, and because of that, I have to counter that. I don't want to, just be scared, afraid, and cry every day, and because that's what the CCP wants. So I try my best not to do that.
Thinking back, say, 20 or 30 years ago, the idea that someone who's an enemy of the Chinese regime, if you like, would be in danger here in Britain would have seemed unbelievable. But times have changed a bit now. We saw the consulate in Manchester, for example, where they dragged the protesters in and beat them up. We've seen Chinese spies exposed. I mean, there is a real danger that they could grab you and take you to the Chinese embassy.
Yeah, I think there is a real danger because I think recently the Chinese Communist Party has been escalating their tactics and their tool to repress on activists, repress on activists overseas. And basically, I think they are now more bolden to do so as well. And there are a couple of reasons. I think firstly, it's because of the lack of response from different governments. And when, for example, that you mentioned a Hongkonger that was being dragged into the Chinese consulate and beaten up. And after that, as far as I knew, the staff was not expelled and there isn't a solid consequence that was given to the Chinese government. And, by not giving them any consequences is actually telling them, oh, you can do whatever you want in this country and you won't be accountable for that. And it is a really dangerous signal to send to the Chinese Communist Party. And because they are receiving these signals right now, they are more bolden, they are more brave, they think that they can repress on people in a more simple way.
So this transnational repression, a term that's become more popular recently. Basically the Chinese regime exporting their persecution to other countries, right?
Yeah, so transnational repression is actually a kind of a new term about how foreign states like the Chinese, Russia, Iran, etc. Harass, intimidate, and threaten people and individuals in a jurisdiction that they have no power to. And it could be targeting people like myself, activists, it could be journalists, it could be diaspora community, it could be lawyers, it could be politicians, it could be anyone. It's just that, some foreign countries that have no right to, in this country, are, using different tactics to intimidate people here.
I wanted to also ask you about extradition. It's been talked about a bit recently from UK to Hong Kong. Government minister said they would never allow political extradition to Hong Kong. Do you think that assurance is enough?
I don't think that assurance is enough. I'm glad that the UK government is not trying to have an extradition treaty with Hong Kong anymore. The Security Minister Dan Jaffer is saying that they will still extradite anyone on a case-by-case and ad hoc basis. Makes me feel kind of unsure whether that is the right decision or the right word to say, because the Chinese Communist Party and the Hong Kong authorities have a track record of prosecuting and accusing human rights defenders or democracy activists using crimes that are not political. For example, they charge Jimmy Lai under fraud. They charge some, Hong Kong activists under crime like assault, under whatever, tax avoidance, etc. So they had a track record of using non-political crimes against these activists. And I'm unsure about whether the UK government have the ability to identify which charge is political and which charge is not political. For people like myself, for people like Jimmy Lai, for people who had a profile, it's relatively safer for these people, because if the Hong Kong authorities charge me with fraud tomorrow, the UK government would be able to identify that as a political charge. But for people who are, who doesn't have a public profile, or for other, 2 million Hong Kongers that, go to the protest but are not speaking publicly, they are more at risk, because when the Hong Kong authorities charge them with fraud, the UK government would not be able to identify that as a political charge. And I think that poses dangers in the Hong Kong community, and therefore, the Hong Kong community are panicking about that, because we don't have confidence that the UK government know what the Hong Kong authorities could use against us.
Do you think it's somehow that our politicians here don't quite recognise how dangerous the situation is in Hong Kong for people such as yourself if they got extradited back there?
Well, I think some politicians would know what happened in Hong Kong, and to be honest with you, the whole 2019 movement started with an extradition treaty that happened. The Hong Kong authorities would like to implement an extradition treaty in Hong Kong back in 2019, and to allow the Hong Kong authorities to extradite suspects to China for trial. And we all knew that China does not have rule of law, and we don't have any confidence in the Chinese judicial system. And therefore, in 2019, Hong Kongers stepped up on the street against this treaty. And now, when the UK government say, oh, they want to extradite people back to Hong Kong, or, open the door for that. They didn't want to, but they opened the door for that. It's dangerous because since the national security law was imposed by Beijing in 2020, Hong Kong has no rule of law anymore. And the whole civil society is dismantled until, now there were 1,900 political prisoners in Hong Kong, as I just mentioned. And when there is no rule of law in Hong Kong, I think the British, as a rule of law country, should not send anyone back to Hong Kong, because if you can't guarantee that they can have a fair trial in Hong Kong, you can't send them to Hong Kong. That's what I think.
We had the Sino-British agreement that was supposed to last until 2047. Then we saw this national security law in 2020, Article 23 a few years later. How have these changes impacted life in Hong Kong?
So when the British government and the Chinese government signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly are all guaranteed under the basic law, and Hong Kong was promised to have a high degree of autonomy under the one country, two system framework. And it worked quite well until 2014, 2016, 2019. When in 2014, Hong Kongers went to, go on the street for protests for a universal suffrage, a real democracy, that we can vote for the leader of Hong Kong, because, after the handover, we can't actually vote for the leader of Hong Kong. Right. It was kind of picked by Beijing, and some people, some representative could elect the leader of Hong Kong, but not everyone could pick it. And therefore, people in Hong Kong have been, calling out the Sino-British Joint Declaration, and, use that to kind of fight for a universal suffrage, a real democracy. And it failed, of course, and because of how Beijing has infiltrated the government in Hong Kong, and where Beijing had a lot of control in the government. And in 2019, after the extradition movement, it's not only about the extradition treaty in Hong Kong anymore. It's also about holding police brutality accountable, holding the government accountable, about having universal suffrage, etc. It turned into a pro-democracy movement in 2019. And basically, in 2020, after Beijing has imposed the national security law, all these freedom has gone. all pro-democracy media has shut down after that because you can no longer express your opinion freely, and the whole opposition party are also shut down, including the largest democratic party in Hong Kong, the League of Social Democrats. Few of the biggest democratic party in Hong Kong has forced to shut down because they can no longer operate, and journalists has been arrested. No civil societies left in Hong Kong anymore, and it was really depressing to see all these happen in Hong Kong. Basically, what happened is that the Hong Kong authorities and the Chinese authorities has trashed the Sino-British Joint Declaration. And what more disheartening is that the UK government knew that they trashed the treaty, but they did not do anything to hold them accountable. And I think, the UK government should do something to hold them accountable, or else any country could sign a treaty with the British and not do what it said on the treaty, and it's not how it should work.
Do you think a lot of Hong Kongers feel a bit let down and Britain should step in to enforce the Sino-British Agreement?
Well, I think Hong Konger would thank the British government launching the BNO visa for us to escape, but that is not enough. We all knew that is not enough. And we, of course, think that the British should stand stronger and, to uphold the Sino-British Joint Declaration, not just to condemn Beijing for breaking the treaty, but also to actually do something to hold them accountable, including sanction Chinese and Hong Kong officials that are accountable for, cracking down on Hong Kong freedom, on implementing the national security law. And there are now still 2 British judges that are sitting in Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal, do ruling in national security cases, which is all nonsense. So I think the UK government should also, not allow any judges to sit in Hong Kong court, because when British and the judicial system in the UK is by rule of law, you can't have judges from a rule of law country to sit in a Hong Kong court that is no longer run by rule of law.
I wanted to also ask you a bit about Jimmy Lai. I know he's quite well known amongst Hong Kongers. His court case happened recently. What's happening with Jimmy, and what role does he play in all of this?
So last week it was the start of Jimmy Lai's trial closing argument. It's all about how the judge trying to prove that Jimmy Lai is guilty, and a lot of defense from Jimmy Lai's lawyer. It's about how Jimmy Lai is upholding press freedom, and the judge doesn't agree with that. And we kind of knew that Jimmy Lai would be found guilty, but we don't know when the verdict would be. It's not looking good. Jimmy Lai has been in prison for 1,700 days. Today is the 1,700th day.
So you knew he would be found guilty, not because he is guilty, but because the system is so corrupt.
Because the system is so corrupt. Whenever the government wants you to be guilty, you will be guilty, and that it's the problem of national security law. It has, 95% or 90-something% of conviction rate. It is really high conviction rate. And, Jimmy Lai is in prison for 1,700 days. He is 77 years old. He is a British citizen. And, his health isn't looking well. It was supposed to start the closing argument 2 weeks ago, but because of, the weather and because of his health problem, it was postponed to this last Monday. And, we don't know, how long he could live. We don't know how his health was. The UK government is still not able to have consular assistance to him. If he died in prison, it's not going to look good to the Hong Kong authorities and the Chinese authorities. And the Jimmy Lai case is really significant around the world, in the UK and also among the Hong Kong community, because Jimmy Lai is a symbol of upholding democracy, upholding press freedom in Hong Kong. As a Hong Konger, I felt like I and a lot of other Hong Kongers are all going through the trial with Jimmy Lai, because if Jimmy Lai is found guilty, it means that upholding freedom of speech, freedom of the press in Hong Kong is guilty. So that is the significance, and that is how symbolic it is.
It's almost a bit embarrassing for Britain. I mean, this is a British citizen. He's been there, he said 1,700 days. We don't even have access to him. It feels like we're kind of useless in the situation almost.
I think the British government is a bit too naive in dealing with the Chinese government. The Chinese government have been using different tactics to, infiltrate the UK's economy, every aspect of the UK economy. And that is a problem because it influences the British government decision. And they have been investing a lot in academia, in British infrastructure, and because of the reliance on China, that the UK economy is now, it's hard for the UK economy the UK government to make a decision against China or make decisions that would upset China, because how the British economy is now more reliant on China. And it is a huge risk and a huge threat, because the Chinese government is now asking to build a mega embassy here in London. And well, for me, for a lot of MPs, for local residents, for the intelligence service, we knew that it is a huge threat, and we knew that it would be a surveillance hub. We knew that that wouldn't go well, because we shouldn't allow the Chinese government have that historical sites, have that huge space, and have that biggest embassy in Europe if that was built. And it's also a symbolism of the UK government is giving them the largest embassy in the UK, and kind of saying that, oh, you are now the most important country.
And our best friend.
Yeah, our best friend. We will give you the largest embassy in the UK. You are more important than every other country. That is an absolutely wrong signal to send, because, firstly, you shouldn't treat an authoritarian regime as your favorite partner. That is not something a democratic country needs to do. And, when we all knew that the UK government should reject the proposal, why would the UK government still considering the proposal? They shouldn't even consider, and they should just reject at the same day, like on the first day, right? And we think that one of the reasons is because of the £600 million deal that Rachel Reeves signed earlier this year. We think that the Chinese is kind of either threatening the British government of pulling out funding, or using some economic tool, economic power to leverage their ask. And the reason why the British government has not said a solid no is that because they are scared that the Chinese government would pull out funding or would do anything to affect the economy, and especially when we knew that the Labour Party is now prioritizing the economy as what they have to do. So for me as a Hong Konger, I felt kind of unsafe, and I felt that the UK government is too naive on dealing with the whole issue. They should, not stop over relying on, Chinese investment. They could spread their risk. They should find other source of funding to replace Chinese investment in order to, not afraid of upsetting China. Like you can't, when the Chinese government are testing the UK's red line, they are asking, they first dragged a Hong Konger into the Chinese consulate, and then they placed bounty on activists like myself, and then they imprisoned British citizen Jimmy Lai. They also asked for the biggest embassy in central London, right next to the Tower Bridge. I think they are testing the red line and see at what point would the UK government say no to them. And so far, the UK government has not said no to them, right? And, that is dangerous because, imagine one day if the Chinese government or if China invade Taiwan, what would the UK government do? Would they stand with China or would they stand with Taiwan? If they stand with Taiwan, the Chinese government would still pull out fundings, right? They will still do what they are doing right now to threaten the UK government to stand on their side. So before that happened, I think the UK government should, de-risk and, to try to stop over relying on China, find some alternative as soon as possible before that happened.
Well, the other kind of big issue with this embassy is an embassy has diplomatic immunity. They can do kind of what they want. It's the land of China there. So underneath the embassy is these cables that link the City of London and Canary Wharf. So they could literally tap into the cables and look at the information that's going through them. There's quite a national security issue, really.
Yeah, it is a national security issue, and it is not a good decision that the UK government allowed them to hack and access these cables. These are finance data cable that sent from Canary Wharf to central London, and it's not just about the UK, but also the United States has also access to these data, and the United States government has warned about the decision of this mega embassy. They also said no. And, there is no way that the UK government should allow China to access any of these data. It's their national security. It's the data that, they need for their economy. And, businesses, they have their office in Canary Wharf because they trust that the UK government could protect them. But if you tell all these businesses in Canary Wharf that, your data might be accessible by China because they have now built a new embassy over there, do you think they would pull off their headquarters from Canary Wharf? And, that would also be a threat to the UK's economy. And therefore, the government should just reject this proposal as soon as possible.
Finally, I just wanted to go back to Hong Kong. What would you like to see happen there? How can we counter the repression and bring back some of the freedoms this great city once had?
Well, at this stage, it is really hard to say what we can do to, get back the freedom in Hong Kong. But I think there is a lot of things that might help the situation if, you are a journalist. Maybe, report on the situation in Hong Kong because now the Hong Kong government still want to pretend everything is normal. They still want to pretend that there is rule of law. And, therefore, having journalists to report on Hong Kong would make them less bolden to crack down on these, civil society, on any protest that might happen in Hong Kong. If you are a politician watching this, maybe, speak out for Hong Kong, speak out for Jimmy Lai and other political prisoners like Gwyneth Ho, like Cheung, etc. Because not just about Jimmy Lai, also there are still a lot of Hong Kongers that are in prison, although they are innocent, because speaking out against the Chinese government and upholding what the British believe, which is democracy and rule of law. And if you are any other people like teacher, if you're a student watching this, maybe write to your MP and say you're concerned about Hong Kong. Ask your MP to speak out for Hong Kong. And the last thing I would say is to protect the democracy and freedom here in the UK, because when you don't protect democracy, it's really easy for it to be taken away. We have to protect and uphold democracy, vote whenever you can. You don't want, anything, everything happened in Hong Kong might happen in the UK as well if you stop protecting it. And, stop letting the Chinese, state-owned company or Chinese company to infiltrate and to invest here in the UK, because you don't want to over-reliance on China, and you don't want to be too late before you can get rid of Chinese influence.
Chloe Cheung, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.